Welcome back to another episode of The Road Chose Me. My name's Dan Grech, and today it's time for some TLC on the Jeep. So she is 10 years old now, and we have had some adventures together, and actually it's finally spring here in Canada, and I washed her yesterday for the first time in, 5 months or something. And when all the road grime came off, I started to see there's quite a few places where surface rust is starting to develop. And Sandy is not coming with me on my expedition that I'm starting in about 2 months. Global shipping right now is such a nightmare. It makes no sense at all to ship a vehicle anywhere. So Sandy's gonna go down for a nap for maybe 12 or 18 months. And before I put her away, I have a whole bunch of things that I wanna clean up, especially take care of some of this surface rust that's showing up around the place. So in this episode, I'll run through, I'll show you what I'm doing, and as I work on each different section, I'll tell a story about how that came to be. So if you want to see how I'm going to prepare Sandy for the nap while she rests while I'm off having a new expedition, stick around, I'll get into it all right now. So as most of you know, I did actually roll the Jeep on its side when I was in Uganda. And not my proudest moment, not something that I hope to ever repeat, but you can check it out. There's a link up in the corner to show exactly what that looked like. But anyway, when that happened, the snorkel itself, it's got a few scratches on it, but no big deal. But the snorkel obviously buckled in a little bit and it dinted the A-pillar on the Jeep here right next to the windscreen. And it's really hard to get at right now, so I'm gonna get the snorkel off to show you and so I can clean it up and fix it before rust really develops. And it was actually really funny. When I was at Overland Expo, I spoke to Dave Harriton, the president of American Expedition Vehicles, who designed and built the snorkel. And when I told him all about it, he said, "Oh, that doesn't surprise me. The snorkel is stronger than Jeep sheet metal." So anyway, let's get the snorkel off and then I'll show you exactly what we're dealing with underneath it. So now the snorkel's out of the way, you can really see here where the snorkel came in and the A-pillar here is actually crushed, as well as the paint having come off. And you can see there is a bit of rust forming. I did hit this with a really small paint pen at one point, trying to cancel out some of that rust. So my plan right now is I'm gonna sand that back, I'm gonna clean all of this up, get all that dirt off there. I've got a can of primer that I'll put on, and then I've got some color match paint. I went down to the local hardware store and just got a spray can of color match paint. And while I'm here in the area, there's also a few other bigger stone chips. There's one there above the windshield, there's a couple over on the other side, and even across the front of the hood here, some of these are actually from the Alaska Highway trip. These stone chips, I don't know how well you can see them on the camera, these stone chips are absolutely going to attract rust. They're down to bare metal. There's a couple right there. So absolutely worth taking care of those while I've got all the painting stuff out, while I'm going to sand a few things back. So let's get stuck into it. All right, so I've got it down to bare metal pretty well. I'm happy with that, good enough for now. I'm gonna move around and do the rest of them all the way around the hood. All right, you can see I've taped up everywhere around that I want to paint. And my idea is I don't really want any sharp edges. I kind of am hoping that I can blend the paint a little bit. We'll see how it goes. I'll start over here because it's underneath the snorkel, so it doesn't matter too much how good it turns out. And I am going to put primer on this one because it's a larger area and it's more covered, but I'll see how thick that turns out once I do the primer and the color match paint. And if it's kind of really thick, Maybe elsewhere I'll just do the color match and I won't do the primer. Let's see how it goes. Before I get into paint though, you might notice the pieces of paper I'm using. Those are actually drafts from my book that I released. This is The Road Chose Me Volume 2. So it's funny, as I'm taping them on, I'm reading stories about driving this Jeep around Africa. And I'm just gonna run around now quickly with some acetone and wipe down everywhere that I'm about to paint. Make sure I remove all my fingerprints, any wax, any grease, anything like that, and hope that the paint will then stick really well. So let's get into it. So that's the first coat on everywhere that I sanded back. It went on a little thick in a couple of spots. I'm not the world's best spray painter, but I'm pretty happy. The color match looks really good so far. It says I should leave it for about an hour, and I'm trying to do multiple really thin coats. So I'll come back in an hour and then I'll probably do 2, maybe 3 coats and see how it's looking. And hopefully the color match is really nice and it'll just blend in and we won't even see it. All right, so over the last couple of hours, I've come back a few times and done new coats, and I'm really happy with how it's come out. For the most part, you can't actually see any of where I sanded back, like that spot there or here on the pillar. My only question is if the paint won't quite be sort of shiny enough. And I did ask if it needed a clear coat, and the guy said no, it should be fine, so I guess we'll see how that goes. Anything's possible. Around the back here, I did some as well. There was some stone chips here on the tailgate where kids in Ethiopia had thrown rocks. So I'm glad to get rid of those. And on the rear bumper, I always stand on the back of it right here when the tailgate's open, and I'd actually worn off the rust proofing. So I did a little bit there on the rear bumper in black. And then around the side here, I decided to do this spot as well. This is where it had come down on its side. So here the door is actually quite buckled. You might be able to see that. And it was all chipped and scratched, and I'd used touch-up paint a little bit, but it was a pretty terrible little job. So I think that's gonna look much better. And then finally, here's the main spot underneath the snorkel. And so clearly much better coverage. It's all painted. I think I'm not gonna have any rust issues. If you can see right there, I definitely went a little bit heavy on the paint, but oh well, it's under the snorkel, you're never gonna see it. So I'll let it dry here for a couple of hours, good and solidly, and then I'll come back, I'll pull off all the paper, and I'll see how it looks. So I'm pretty happy with that for body color touch-ups. And then of course, the main one, let's have a look down here, have a look at the rock rails. There is some, not just surface rust, but genuine rust developing here on the rock rails. So that's my job for another day, and I'll cut back and you guys will see that almost right now. All right, so there we have it. Peeled the tape off and I'm really happy with the results. Obviously, I mean, this is a bit of a backyard job. The goal wasn't to make the Jeep look like it's brand new. Obviously, it's not. The goal was to make sure that rust won't grow and keep spreading. And I think I've definitely achieved that goal. In a lot of places, the paint has blended and it's difficult to see where I painted. But then there's a few spots like the one on the hood where I painted right to the edges of the tape. And so that means there's kind of like a sharp line. And lesson learned for next time, I shouldn't paint right onto the tape like that, but more blend it and just let it kind of fade back into the paint. But you know, next time I'll do a better job. Another thing I would do differently is I first sanded with 100 grit sandpaper, and I should have gone up to a finer grit just to make it as smooth as possible before I started painting. It wasn't until I'd put on 2 coats, even the 3rd coat, before my sandpaper marks were totally gone. Would have been easier to cover up if I'd gone with a finer grit sandpaper. So I'll do those 2 things differently next time. But overall, you know, to cover up rust, to make sure it doesn't keep growing, I think this has been a success. And so now it's onto those rock rails, try and stop that rust that really is growing. And the reason the rust is so bad on these rock rails is because these actually came off the 2007 Wrangler that I bought, that I originally was bringing to Africa. I tried the diesel conversion, that all failed. And when I was swapping parts back from that one to this one, I actually brought over the rock rails just so I didn't have to trim them to length again. And it's right about here that my day turns a little bit sideways and I snap one of the mounting bolts for the rock rail. Why does that always seem to happen? I tried for about 15 minutes to come up with a creative way to get it out of there, but at the end of the day, there was kind of only one solution. I actually just bought this world's cheapest grinder from Walmart specifically for this project, so it came in actually handy to get me out of this broken bolt. And with that broken bolt out of the way, I was able to get that side off and then move on to the other side, which thankfully came off without any hassles. Here's a look at the worst of the 2 rock rails before I started cleaning it up. You can see, especially underneath, the rust is really taking hold, and I have to take care of this right now. And this is the exact reason I bought that grinder. And I used one of those flap discs, which are kind of like stacked sandpaper, to just really tear in and try and take it down to bare metal everywhere that I could see rust. It was pretty helpful for getting off the dirt as well. And so I just went at this for a couple of hours, about an hour per rock rail, to try and get it down ready to prep and paint. And here's how all my prep finished up. After sanding it back, washing it, wire brushing it, and wiping it all down with acetone, here they are, ready for the first coat of primer. So I put down a good layer of rust prevention primer on all sides, and then I put on 3 coats of matte black rust proofing paint as well. And here's how they looked a couple of days later, after spraying on a coat, letting it dry for a few hours, and then spraying on the next coat. So there we have it. After a couple of days work, it turned out to be more than I anticipated. I'm pretty happy with how things have gone. The sections around the windshield here, especially behind the snorkel, I think look fantastic. Nobody would ever see it. The one spot I did on the hood, you can really see the color difference, probably because it's just such a big flat panel and the original hood is faded a bit from all the African sun. So, you know, lessons learned on that one. But then I went around and I touched up a whole bunch of the black around as well. And I'm super happy with that. I'll show you guys what it looks like as I roll the credits. And I think it's really worth it. Obviously, if I went out and I got some of that stuff that makes the plastic look blacker, you know, if I made the mirrors and the fenders and everything black, I think that would really help. And, you know, 10 years old, she's got 190,000 miles on her now, about 290,000 kilometers. So she's not young anymore, and obviously we've had some adventures. But my goal here was to really get it prepped so I can put it in storage and not come back to a pile of rust. And so in this coming week, I'll do oil changes on everything, I'll grease everything, and I'm slowly cleaning out the interior as well and just minimizing and making sure there's nothing in there, you know, that's gonna go bad or cause a problem. I did just find a couple of the floor mats are a little bit wet. So there's a few things like that to deal with. But yeah, Sandy's gonna go down for a sleep while I fly out to a new continent and begin a whole new expedition. And if you wanna learn about where I'm going and what vehicle I'm building, I'm posting all that information on Patreon right now. So I just did a really big post that outlines all of kind of the criteria, the limitations, the things I'm looking to get out of this new trip, and how they then influence my vehicle choice and how I'm going to build that vehicle. So for Africa, harshest conditions on the entire planet, I decided I really wanted interior living space, and that's what I built with this vehicle. Whereas where I'm going on this next trip, I haven't prioritized that so heavily. In fact, I'm gonna have a lot of outdoor living space because where I'm going, it should be really nice to camp and be outside a lot. Fingers crossed, of course, if the weather cooperates. So if you want all the details there, what modifications am I planning and why, fuel range, water capacity, all of those good things, they're all over on Patreon, and there's a link in the description of this video. If you head over there, the cheapest support tier is $5 a month. You'll be helping me bring these videos to life, teaching you how to get out and have your overland adventures, and you're gonna get all that behind the scenes info about my upcoming trip. And as well as that, you can have a consulting session with me and I'll help you out with your future vehicle build or your future trip around the world, if that's something you're interested in. So all of that is over on Patreon right now. And once again, thanks very much for watching. If you have enjoyed this, hit that thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. And right now, I'll grab the camera and I'll show you around what I've done in the last few days and how it actually turned out. So one of the main things I did was touch up, as you saw early on, all of the color-coded stuff. So across the front of the hood now, there's no more stone chips from the Alaska Highway. Here on the side there, you might be able to see that different color patch right in the middle of the screen now. Oh well. Up here on the cowl, there were stone chips, they're all gone. And then above the windshield too, there were a couple. And over there behind the snorkel where it all got crushed in when I rolled, that's all taken care of now as well. So I'm super happy with all of that. I think it looks great. I think it looks a lot better than it did. Another really big one that I did was the rock rails, which you saw was super rusty earlier. And so after a coat of primer and a whole bunch of coats of just flat black, I think they look perfectly fine. Obviously it's a Jeep. Next time I take it out and get it covered in mud and dust, you're not going to see any of this anyway. So I don't think it really needs to be actually perfect. Around the back, I did a few things too. Just there above the handle for the tailgate, there were stone chips from where kids had hit it with rocks in Ethiopia. So I color matched all of that. I think that's fantastic. I actually painted the shovel as well because it was super rusty and it just made the whole thing kind of look a little lower quality. Down low here, I painted the tow hitch. That was also really rusty. It had been actually since I bought it. So really happy that that's now black. Everything looks a bit better. And then on the other side, obviously the other rock rail, same story. So again, I think it's really looks good and hopefully going to stop it turning into a pile of rust while it sits in storage for 12 or 18 months. So all in all, I think for a 10-year-old vehicle that's been to 38, 39 countries around the world, we've done well over 100,000 miles in expedition together. I'm pretty happy. It's been a really good vehicle for me and I'm happy to keep looking after her so that she'll keep being good to me.